going.
Just give me 2 seconds. I'm streaming it to YouTube, but I'm doing it unlisted until we get finished.
Okay, sounds good.
That way I don't have to record it. Streaming it to
YouTube, right.
But I'm doing it unlisted until we get finished.
Okay, sounds good.
That way I don't have to record it. All right, so I'll just have to do that muted.
Yeah, that might be helpful.
All right, so at least that is there, and I can clip it later. Yada, yada, yada. Doing bullshit. 2 seconds. Sorry.
Gotcha.
All right, sorry. I'm trying to reconfigure. Okay, we'll just do it that way. Okay.
All right.
Yeah, if you're good to go, I'll introduce the show, and then we'll just say fuck it and do the thing.
All right. Vaiden Pod, there it goes.
All right, I'll give a 5-second countdown, and then I'll just go.
All right.
Hey everybody, welcome to Trash Panda Talks Wrestling. I'm excited to do this. I've been wanting to do this podcast for a long time, even before I met my most excellent co-host, the one and only Lloyd Legacy Sharpe. Say hello.
Hey everybody, I'm here with that guy, talk some wrestling. What a year in wrestling.
Not just a year, but what a lifetime of like what the whole history of wrestling has just been. And that, like, before we even get started, like on what this whole show is about, like what made you a fan of wrestling just to begin with? You know what I mean?
What made me a fan of wrestling is the exact opposite of what it's become. That's the short version. I've been watching wrestling since 1990, and I've obviously done a ton of film and archival, like studying, watching, whatever you want to call it, that precedes that. I've always had a flair for theatrics. I've always been, if I'm to be described unto myself as others see me, a living cartoon character. And no form of entertainment has ever better captured, embodied, or just flat out been the lifestyle that I can either see myself living or I've always wanted to live than the world of professional wrestling. Like, it is extravagant, it is over the top, it is pomp and pageantry and circumstance for pretty much no reason. And I love it. And like, maybe not so much, the falling off the cell, because I couldn't do that, but the general pomp and pageantry and theatrics of wrestling is something that I kind of have in my own life that I project in a lot of ways. And I relate to wrestling on a level of just how it's done and how they tell their stories.
And I would entirely agree with you on that point. Why I love wrestling is because it's one of the oldest forms of storytelling through even if it is scripted combat or just a shoot, it's storytelling in its most natural form. However, I will say personally I became a wrestling fan during the Attitude Era, which is also around the time that I hit puberty, which makes sense.
Yeah, there was plenty of that was TNA before TNA was a thing, if you know what I mean.
Oh yeah, I was like an old school Lita and Team Extreme fanboy.
And that's the thing, because like wrestling at that time was as popular as it's ever been, since the 80s maybe. So like, granted, you look back on a lot of Attitude Era stuff now, and some of that shit has not aged well. But I mean, if you lived through it, quite possibly the greatest time ever in wrestling up to this point.
Would certainly agree. Okay, so what we want to do with this show is not tell you everything about wrestling. We just want to give you the best and the worst. That way you can decide if it's worth watching. I guess without any, this has been a really weird week in wrestling. Yeah, tough. Prayers and thoughts. I know that sounds like an empty gesture to the Showtime's family and friends, and then also with the suicide of Hana Kimura, that one hit me pretty hard too. Just a weird week in wrestling all the way around, and I know we'll do a best and worst of the week later, but I think we can both agree like those things are the worst of wrestling right now. That's just terrible, senseless.
I will say one thing about Shad Gaspard, and I feel like the only solace I took from the situation is that he gave his life so that his son could live.
As tragic as that story was, it was also very, very heartwarming knowing the details of it.
Like, if there's ever talk about a baby face forever.
Just move over Roman Reigns.
Like, I just in an era where you hear stories about parents who are less than attentive, less than present for their children, and like Shad Gaspard did what a lot of people wouldn't see a pro wrestling person to be selfless enough to do, and that is literally say, save him, and knowing that he probably wouldn't make it back, save him. Like, I don't know. There's nothing positive to take from it, but that made it a little easier for me to swallow.
Well, saying that may also be the best thing in wrestling this week, even though it's also the worst thing. Which, speaking of, we have to move fast, so we can't spend. We have a whole week to go through.
Oh God!
And let's just start it off with Raw. Monday Night Raw this week. Do we want to do worst first? I feel like.
Let me make something very clear to the viewers first of all, because I am somewhat of a different voice from Vaiden. Like, Vaiden is a guy who he can call WWE on its bullshit and its merits. Same with AEW. I'm the jaded old fuck that has not been able to sit through an episode of Raw or SmackDown every single week for a long time, but I can't get enough of it, so I keep up and I go back and watch what I want. So you're going to get two different perspectives here. What he might consider the best or worst. As an outside fan looking in, I might consider not so much the best or the worst, but take from this what you'll gather, but just know, he's the fan, I'm the jaded outsider. Just so that's clear.
All right. Do you want to start? I mean, I'll kick it. I'll go first, but do you want my best or worst first?
You know what? Positivity reigns. Give me the best.
Okay, I'm not gonna lie, and it took me, in a 3-hour show, there's a lot of things that can be the best. And I really had to debate it. An honorable mention to two people. Honorable mention to Apollo Crews, just for finally getting a primetime win. Honorable mention to Asuka because how can you hate her? She's amazing in everything she does. Just give her any title and let her have it forever. But the best this week, I'm sorry, I know it wasn't in ring, but the Viking Raiders and and the Street Profits promos are just everything I love about wrestling and everything I love about kayfabe. That is the absolute best thing that happened on Raw. And I'm not going to describe everything that happened, but the Street Profits and the Viking Raiders had a axe throwing competition, which was a continuation from their street ball game last week. And it's an epic balance. It's just like a resurgence of just a friendly rivalry in tag team and trying to build the tag team division that is so lacking in WWE. I think it's just mwah. So that's my best this week.
All right, I will agree with your honorable mention, and I will even agree with your best as far as sports. Here's the thing. I don't know if it's not my best, I'll say that, but here's why I can say that I see why you're saying that, because right now pro wrestling can't do what pro wrestling normally does. And as far as audibles called, that was pretty sweet. All right. My best for Raw is the Apollo Creed push. Because Apollo Creed is one of the most talented, athletic, I don't think I'll call him a big man, but he's one of the most athletically talented muscle men that I think the WWE has had in the last 10 years. Like from a youth perspective. I mean, Brock Lesnar, Roman Reigns, but a guy who you would expect to be just a jacked up, muscle guy. And he is athletic as hell. And you could have done so much with him so much sooner. And I kind of wish it came along sooner, much like Drew McIntyre. I wish there was fans to kind of react to him. But for me, just because I feel like Apollo should have gotten his due a long time ago, Apollo Crews' edgy push is the best on Raw for me.
Like I said, it was very close for me because he has everything. It's like when the New England Patriots need to draft a quarterback and they find a guy that just has everything right on paper. Mm-hmm. Like he's the guy. He I guess Vince just likes the beefiness of Lashley a little bit better, but no, Apollo's perfect. He's got the charisma to back it up. Mm-hmm. All right, that means not to cut you too short, but that means we have to run into the worst of the week, and I'm gonna let you do the worst of the week, and then I'll follow it up.
All right,
worst of Raw, not the week.
Worst of Raw, right. My worst of Raw comes from a place of understanding of kind of why they have to do it, but why Baron Corbin in the main event against Drew McIntyre? Like,
more of it. Why do we need more of that?
Look, Baron Corbin's a very not liked. He's not even divisive. Nobody likes Baron Corbin. I can appreciate him being so unlikable to the point that he's probably the best genuine heel we've had in years. But what has he done aside from kill a couple of cruiserweights to deserve, literally, over the top of the freaking roof? Why did he get a shot against Drew McIntyre on Raw out of nowhere? Literally out of nowhere. Randy Orton couldn't have seen that one coming. Literally out of nowhere, title shot. Why?
I find it hard to disagree with you. However, I think there was something worse on Raw this week. Maybe it's just personal opinion. Maybe I'm starting to get jaded. But Raw opened up this week with its worst segment, which is probably good for production. But you can't open up rehashing a rivalry between Edge and Randy Orton and tell me it's going to be the greatest match of all time when I already saw that match happen at fucking WrestleMania. You can't open up the show and tell me this is the best match you're ever going to see. Best match of all time. And it happened a month ago.
From a pure logic standpoint, that is probably the worst. And their match at WrestleMania wasn't even the greatest wrestling match of all time.
No.
I mean, it wasn't. Okay.
It wasn't even their best match of all time.
Exactly. So, look, here's the thing. I don't mind hearing Edge and Randy Orton cut promos on each other because they're very good. Going into WrestleMania, that was the story I was the most invested in. Like, they both did a really good job. But it's the greatest wrestling match of all time narrative that they're trying to push. You're asking yourself to be let down.
It's not even the greatest rivalry.
Do you know what kind of matches we've had in history? We've had Owen Hart versus Bret Hart at WrestleMania. We've had Okada and Omega. We've had Bret Hart and Steve Austin. We've had Rey Mysterio and Kurt Angle. We've had Brock Lesnar and Kurt Angle.
We had The Rock. We had The Rock and Steve Austin.
Exactly. We've had Ric Flair and Steamboat. We've had Steamboat and the greatest wrestling match of all time.
Hogan and Andre the Giant.
Okay, to be fair, in the ring, that match would probably be better than Hogan and Andre. Not from a stature standpoint, just in the ring. But still,
I agree.
But still, the greatest wrestling match of all time, you're asking to be let down. They're setting themselves up for disappointment. Like, no. I love Edge. I love Orton. But Edge had better matches in 2002 with Kurt Angle, and Randy Orton had better matches with The Undertaker in 2005 than they're going to have with each other at the next pay-per-view.
All right. At least we agree on that.
Yes.
That moves us up to Wednesday night. The singular AEW promotion, the singular AEW Dynamite that's on broadcast. I'm a huge AEW fanboy, but maybe that's because I'm starting to get jaded like Lloyd.
AEW is definitely the jaded fans wrestling show.
I'm gonna start AEW off because this week's episode it was the send off episode before the pay-per-view, so we could only expect so much. But I'm gonna start mine off with the worst part of that, and I'm a little bit of a fanboy, so it's hard for me to pick.
Oh, that's fine. I don't blame you.
But it was the match with Orange Cassidy and Ray Phoenix. I'm a huge fan of both. I've been a fan of Phoenix for longer than I have Cassidy. Freshly Squeezed is such a good fucking gimmick. But no, Phoenix had a really, really bad botch spot that it actually took him out of the pay-per-view for this week. He literally broke his tailbone doing a moonsault to nobody. And that was just, it was hard to watch.
I think that would be objectively the worst on any show that would take place on. Just, ow. So yeah, I get.
And then I'll give you my best and let you have this one. There was a match I wanted that I didn't get, so I'm just gonna have to I'm gonna give honorable mention of best of Dynamite this week to Jericho because he's just the best at promotion in the game, and he like they opened the week with making me laugh. Shut your ass. Then like, oh, thank you, Jericho. Like that's you're speaking my sentiments. But no, the best match this week on Dynamite was actually the main event. Matt Hardy and Sammy Guevara. I'm a huge fan of Sammy. Been a huge fan of him since Lucha Underground. Rest in peace. That guy just knows what he's doing. He knows how to work. He knows how to be a heel. And then you just have broken Matt Hardy, the character that we've been wanting to see for so long. And then it was just, there was nothing bad about this match. And it sold what happened at the pay-per-view. Just even that was just the best.
Yeah, not bad picks at all. I mean, I'll admit my best for AEW, and I even had to go back and watch this particular part again, just to really take it in. But my best for AEW, Jake versus Arn. Didn't even have to get physical. Like, seeing Jake Roberts back to being Jake Roberts. Not Heroes of Wrestling Jake Roberts. Jake Roberts being Jake Roberts. And Arn Anderson, I always felt was an underrated promo. Like, he obviously wasn't the most bombastic. You know, when you're next to Ric Flair, it's easy to get overshadowed. But Arn Anderson, I always felt when it was time to get serious and when it was time to look down the lens, so to speak, and cut a promo on you, he was very, very good at that. And him and Jake, war of words. Normally, I'd be like, "Oh, they're just gonna talk," but you know what? I like hearing them talk. So,
no, it was. I'm not gonna lie. That probably should have gotten another honorable mention for me, just because Jake has not lost a single step in his promo game. He just knows how to be evil. There's nothing else to say with that. Exactly. But it didn't make the cut for me because I was talking about this like literally about an hour ago before we started doing this. And I mentioned Jake the Snake Roberts to my roommate. One of my roommates is 3 years older than me. My other roommate is right on 5 years younger than me. And he had no idea who I was talking about.
Right.
So I guess for nostalgia fans, it's great.
Right.
It's so good, but like, if I didn't know who these guys were, it wouldn't matter.
Not knowing who Jake Roberts is and not knowing who Arn Anderson is would definitely not do that promo that segment any justice. So that's fair. That's fair. The worst of AEW for me, the fact that it had to end. I found nothing in review or in reviews that I've because I do the What Culture, Cultaholic. Nothing that I've heard in review. Nothing that I went back and watched for myself in pieces. I didn't have anything bad to say about the show at all. Just
I think that serves the point of my worst of the week. I had to watch it a couple of times too, and the worst thing I found was Phoenix had a botched spot. Like everything else was great.
The worst thing on AEW was either the fact that they had to abide by network guidelines and not go on forever, or the fact that an accident happened in the ring. But nothing of their own planning fell on us. So good job, AEW.
Yeah, they just week by week just continue to beat out that other promotion that's developmental. And
I will say this: I do have a best and worst for NXT.
I don't watch NXT.
That's fair.
They've been doing my boy Velveteen Dream a little bit wrong in my opinion. But I will let you, if you want to talk about NXT, I'll let you have this.
Fair enough. And I'll keep it brief.
Hell, I'll even give you the whole screen.
All right. So as far as Velveteen Dream goes, he's right. If you read the headlines recently, maybe he's getting buried a little bit, but that's another story. My best for NXT this week, 2 words, tank segment. Now, I know some people online didn't think that a girl getting on a tank and running things over was very becoming of the NXT brand. You know what? I got 2 words for you. D-Generation X. They got away with it, but somehow when a girl does it, it's not entertaining. You want different, you got different. That's my best. Now, the worst, too much Charlotte. The fact that she won the NXT championship in and of itself, I thought wasn't necessary. The fact that they have her as NXT champion and still on other shows while being NXT champion, I think wasn't necessary. The fact that she ran down and made a run-in on what was otherwise a great freaking match to close, I feel wasn't necessary. Charlotte's great. I am not a Charlotte hater. Charlotte Flair in the ring is probably, if not one of the best in-ring performers we've had the last 5 years. She is right up there with Bayley, Sasha, whoever you want to name. Charlotte can go. But you can overexpose anybody, and her being on NXT this week, running in on an otherwise good match, too much Charlotte. Too much Triple H. Too much. That's my worst.
I'm gonna back you up on that too, because it actually leads me into to SmackDown. Charlotte almost got a nod for worst this week on a different promotion that we talked about earlier. Just because she's on every promotion this week, and I get it, we're in the middle of a quarantine, and some wrestlers can work, won't work. They're in the situation that they're in, but there are other wrestlers who are willing to work and push other storylines. And why are you giving Charlotte this inferior belt? I do agree. But that does bring us to SmackDown. All right, Lloyd, I'm going to let you lead. I got my notes here. Give me your worst, and then I'll give you my worst.
All right, well, you know what? My worst and best, as I'm going over it here, pretty simple. The best and worst is the AJ Styles trade. First of all, okay, let me be completely transparent. I love AJ Styles. To me, as far as stars that the WWE did not create coming into the WWE to make a name for themselves, AJ Styles has done better than a lot of people in that regard. He's done better than Shinsuke Nakamura has, and not because of Shinsuke, because booking. He's done better than Samoa Joe has, not because of Samoa Joe, because booking. He's done better than EC3 did, not because of EC3, because booking, etc., etc., etc. AJ Styles came from the outside and made his name even bigger in the WWE. So I think him going to SmackDown is a solid for SmackDown, because we got AJ Styles versus Shinsuke Nakamura in a match that I didn't completely think was that bad. Now, the worst part of SmackDown was the AJ Styles trade, because why? He was just sent to Raw a few months ago to reform the OC after SmackDown Live became the house that AJ Styles built. And quick note, give me a second, quick note. Some people out there want to say, no, SmackDown Live isn't the house that AJ Styles built. Kurt Angle, Eddie Guerrero, Rhino, Rey Mysterio, they built. First of all, that is not SmackDown Live. That's SmackDown. And SmackDown Live and SmackDown are two different entities. The Ruthless Aggression SmackDown that Kurt Angle, Eddie Guerrero, and all of them built died in 2013 when Randy Orton won the World Heavyweight Championship, and they essentially killed the brand split before they brought it back 3 years later. I am not going to put the filth that SmackDown has been on the last 10 years on Eddie Guerrero. He did not create that, and if he created that, he'd be ashamed of himself. So don't give me that. Now, AJ Styles making his name on SmackDown, and then for no reason being sent, on SmackDown, then being sent to Raw, had a great run on Raw for a few weeks, few months, and then now he's back on SmackDown. I don't know why. I don't get it. It seemed out of nowhere. He got traded for other wrestlers. The logic. I don't get the logic. I don't get it. But
hey, well, I'll cut in here because I don't want you to have a stroke.
Thank you.
But I will agree with you. Definitely the worst of SmackDown. As soon as you said AJ Styles, I was like, the brand split, that is the worst shit. Why are we still doing this? Why are we pretending there's a brand split? Just because you have two shows on two different networks doesn't mean they're all under. And then, like, in the middle of the match, they told us that he was traded for other wrestlers that we don't know about. It's infuriating to operate under this guise of brand versus brand, just so you can have one pay-per-view event 6 months from now. It's absolutely infuriating.
I love the match he had when he came back, but the move itself, beyond his match with Shinsuke.
No, and I agree. Which brings I had an honorable mention for the worst of the week, and the honorable mention was just that match. Just like didn't match up for storyline. However, my honorable mention for this week on SmackDown was that match. That match is just. Can you argue with watching Shinsuke versus AJ? This is dream matches that we just are lucky enough that they like working together.
Exactly, and that if they didn't have that match, then AJ would have not gotten the best of SmackDown this week, because otherwise AJ going to SmackDown.
It makes no sense. It makes no sense. However, I do disagree with you. That was not the best thing that happened on SmackDown this week, which brings me back to the point before with Charlotte being on every brand. That match with Charlotte and Bayley was just so good.
Yes.
It's everything you could want in a wrestling match. It's a bad guy versus a bad guy. It didn't matter who won. It was just always gonna be great.
That's fair. My father and I were raving about that, and like my father's more of a mark than I am, so like I envy that. Like I wish I could watch wrestling through his lenses, because like I probably wouldn't even complain as much as I do. But yeah, like he's a Charlotte Flair fan. Admittedly, like you just saw him earlier behind me. You know, if I wasn't on video, he probably would have went woo and then strutted off. Like he does that. Woo! Exactly. Like we woo quite often. So yeah, that's a solid best. You know, in the ring, like if you're gonna have Charlotte on all three shows, that's not a bad way to make use of her.
And that brings us to last night. And I normally I prepay for the pay-per-view.
I did not get to see it. I'm gonna let you take this because I only got to read notes on it. I didn't even get to see any clips yet. I'm gonna let you take this one.
But okay, because to be fair, I was only able to like fully watch everything like this morning, and even that was kind of clipped up. Just because I didn't, this is like the first time I didn't buy the AEW pay-per-view.
Right.
Yeah, it's rent week, forgive
Fair.
me.
Fair.
But oh my God. Well, let me ask you, Lloyd, again, best or worst first?
You know what? Because there's a lot of people who don't think that AEW is all that. But let's show them that we can be fair. Give the worst first.
Okay, the worst. It's not going to be a popular opinion. Nyla Rose losing her title. I didn't like it. I didn't like it. Don't get me wrong. She's a great wrestler. She is an abs. She's so good. What storyline do you have for her? This is. I hate to be this guy, but I do pay attention to some of the online circles, and I kind of feel like they took the title off of Nyla Rose to get away from some of the heat that she's been getting recently in social media, probably for the same reasons as her alert that we mentioned earlier, the suicide reasons and stuff. She's been getting a lot of hate. So I hate that they had to take the title off of her.
I wish
and
they
I
would do the same
don't
thing
think
to
she's
Tessa
the best person to hold the title.
I gotta say this. I wish they would. I wish if that's what they did, that Impact would do the same to Tessa Blanchard, or did do the same to Tessa Blanchard. But that's another story. I hear you. Go ahead.
But the best, and it was a tie. Honestly, if I have to cut it down, it comes down to a very like one specific spot in each of these matches. So I'll give the honorable mention, Double or Nothing, honorable mention. Dude, the stadium run was so fun. And then watching the fallen or the broken angel. It's such a good spot. Kenny Omega, God bless you. Such a good spot. But Kenny Omega, that spot was not as good as the Casino Royale ladder match at the beginning when Darby Allin did a fucking fakie drop with a skateboard off of a 15-foot ladder onto Scorpio Sky, who was laying across a ladder. I don't know how neither of those men are alive right now. It was
that happened?
That actually happened. Darby Allin went to the top of a 15-foot ladder and laid Scorpio Sky across a ladder from the ring to the apron and dropped off with a skateboard onto his stomach. And neither one of those men are injured.
Pardon me, I'm going to grab a Coke.
It is the greatest spot. Those men clearly decided before the match they didn't care whether either one of them lived or died, because they probably both died in the middle of that. But then Darby Allin got up and challenged Cage. Which, if you haven't seen the pay-per-view, now Cage is part of AEW. He made his appearance and he won the AEW equivalent of Money in the Bank. He won the chip. Yeah, Cage, the Machine. But that also is an honorable mention for worst spot, because Cage and Darby Allin totally botched a spot where they were doing a ladder spot. And they totally botched it and had to redo it, and it was hard to watch.
I can imagine.
But yeah, Darby Allin doing a fucking skateboard drop onto somebody's face, essentially off of a ladder. That's just This is the greatest spot I've seen in a long time. And it happened at the beginning. Not that the rest of the matches were bad, but that was just so good.
That's man. I've had a skateboard fly into the side of my cheek from somebody who fell off of it, and I remember how that felt. So I can't imagine somebody coming down from the sky with, oh God.
Yeah, no, like I was watching it with my roommate, and he's not a wrestling fan, but even when he saw it, he was like, "They're both dead. They're both dead."
Like, I'm just hearing it. Like, obviously I didn't see it, but I'm hearing it, and I'm like, what the?
Oh, and then that sells my other point of why this spot was so good. Darby Allin played such a great fake knee injury after this spot that sold honestly it sold the terrible spot that happened later with Cage, which is why that wasn't the worst. Darby Allin's an actual actor.
Well, here's the thing. I can understand why they might put that first or in the first match, because you know how back in the day you had your cruiserweight matches that usually start off the show to like get people hyped up and, you know, get people ready to go for like the rest of the pay-per-view. That sounds like an amazing thing that happened in the first match to keep the crowd invested. But, and I'm not, this isn't a best or worst thing, but in your opinion, did any spot or anything like after that even come close to matching up to it?
Yes. Like I said, very, very close.
Okay.
When when Kenny Omega did the Angel to Sammy Guevara at the end of the Stadium Stampede, it was as close as you could get to being the best spot on the match. And again, the pay-per-view itself was so good that I'm having to nitpick spots. So, like, yeah, just Darby Allin. I sincerely hope Darby Allin starts a proper rivalry with Cody to get the TNT Championship. It just all makes sense. But it's just Darby Allin.
So that's your best.
Yeah, that's my absolute best.
Gotcha. I'm gonna have to find a way to see this pay-per-view because it sounds amazing.
I would just watch the opening match. If you want to see the best and worst, it happens in the opening match.
All right.
The rest of the pay-per-view is totally worth watching, but the best and worst happens in the first match.
Gotcha.
Which brings us to, we got to round this up.
Yep.
I like to end on a positive note, so I want to hear your worst of the week first.
All right.
And then I'll give you my worst after your worst.
Well, my worst of the week, and admittedly, it's normally, sometimes I'm going to do worst of the week that might come as a surprise or something different that most people wouldn't expect. But my worst of the week is the AJ Styles trade. Because again, this is a 2-decade-long issue almost of a brand split that was pretty good when it started. Like 2002 to 2005, even though Raw was hard to watch, at least there you could differentiate. It seemed like a proper brand split. When Bischoff was running Raw and Stephanie / Paul Heyman / Theodore Long were running SmackDown, it seemed like two distinctly different shows. And then from there, it never seemed the same again. And this problem with AJ Styles appearing on SmackDown represents everything that has gone wrong with the brand split since the mid-2000s. It has represented everything that they have not been able to keep consistent. It represents a byproduct of sometimes it has a good thing that can come out of it, like an AJ Styles match with Shinsuke Nakamura, but it doesn't take away from the sheer lacking of logic of it all. And for just representing something that we've been complaining about for 15 years, not just in the past week of wrestling. The AJ Styles trade as a byproduct of a brand split that doesn't exist is my worst of the week.
It's funny because when I was writing my notes right before the show and how I wanted to introduce my worst of the week, only note I wrote down for worst of the week was brand split. It's so bad because I didn't want to put it on the list because I feel like it's gonna be every week. The worst of the week is the stupid facade of a brand split. It's so unnecessary. It's fine that you have a red brand championship. It's fine that you have a blue brand championship, and then you have two mid-card championships for both of them. It makes sense because the show goes on for 2-3 hours, 2.5 hours on average. But
here's the
thing. Why?
Here's the thing. Because back in the early 2000s, they did the brand split because the overload of talent from WCW closing, there were too many people and you needed 2 shows to do it. That's why they did it right then. But since then, the roster has significantly diluted compared to what it was back then. There's no need back then you needed one because there were so many talents. Now you don't really need a brand split, and because you don't have enough superstars to make a brand split worthwhile, you have to bring people over to different shows, which means a brand split's irrelevant. So
exactly, it never mattered.
But
we're there. I will say, just AJ's so good. Yes. I don't hate AJ at all for anything.
Not at all. Not at all.
So good. I think that brings it. That's the best of the week.
I don't want to sound cliche, and I know it's a jaded older fan thing to say, but goddamn, my best of the week is the Snake versus the Enforcer in a war of words.
If that's your best of the week, you should watch the Double or Nothing pay-per-view because that is a very, very big storytelling point in that match. And some people even say that Lance Archer lost because Jake was no longer in his corner.
All right. I actually, when I first saw the Marshall's review of that, I'm like, wait a minute. So good point.
If it wasn't for the nostalgia, that'd be the best. My best of the week is very biased. But like I said earlier when I was talking about Darby Allin and even the matches in between on Double or Nothing last night, the best in wrestling this week is just AEW pay-per-view. Every match is amazing. Every match is great. You might disagree with the results of it, but like there's one bad spot in the entire fucking pay-per-view, and it's my worst of the pay-per-view. It's everything about it is just fun, great, amazing. It's got technical ability in the way that Jungle Boy lost to what's his name, MJF, Fag Boy, whatever. Sorry. I hate it. He's so good at being such a bad guy. He's so good. I'm sorry. But he would be proud that I'd call him that. Just because of his character. The ending of that match makes sense for the characters and in the story that they're pushing. yeah, I didn't like Nyla Rose losing the title, but it's only because of who she lost it to. I don't like the story, but it makes me hate the characters even more.
Which is the point.
The show made me feel all the things.
And how often
I laughed,
in wrestling?
I cried, I cheered, I booed, I did all the things. Double or Nothing this week, best thing in wrestling.
And how often can you say that wrestling makes you feel?
Yeah, that was exactly it.
That's fair.
And honorable mention to best and worst of the week, Jim Ross. His commentary during Double or Nothing is both amazing and awful.
Oh God.
There's even one spot where he accidentally says TNA instead of TNT. And right after that, he says, well, I think I'm going to be fired on Monday. See you next week, guys. It's the best and worst, but it's old school wrestling, and it makes me feel good.
Jim Ross, I mean, obviously, to most people, universally speaking, probably the greatest play-by-play announcer of all time. But I mean, I have, when I've watched AEW, he's still good. He does not capture for me the magic of 96 to 2002 Jim Ross, but he's definitely not as bad now as Jerry the King Lawler.
Oh, I would. Oh, yeah. I don't think that's not even questionable.
No, because like Jim Ross may not be as good as he once was, but he's still good. Jerry Lawler was good, but not anymore.
I'll actually say he's probably better now than Jerry ever was to begin with.
Yeah, than Jerry ever.
And the difference is,
I can agree with that.
He's just slower.
Well, I can agree
he might
with
have
that.
to think about it for 1 second longer, but he's still better in the end, and just in everything he says.
Well, I mean, I can agree with that, definitely, but that only speaks to how good Jim Ross is now, because you have to consider how good Jerry Lawler once was. Like, there was a time.
Wait, let me stop you. Let me stop you right there. Name or just say one iconic line from Jerry Lawler doing commentary.
One iconic line.
You got 5 seconds. And the fact that you weren't able to think of one in 5 seconds, I'll respond to that with a line from Jim Ross. Oh my God!
Well, I didn't want to say puppies, so that was easy. But that's the thing.
Yeah, puppies.
That speaks to your point. I'm not sitting here saying that Jerry Lawler, and I didn't want to go there because, respect the ladies, but still, Jerry Lawler at one time, he didn't have a lot of memorable calls, but if you sat through an episode of Raw and SmackDown, him and Jim Ross together worked. Now, Jim Ross being better than Jerry Lawler ever was, that's true. I agree with that. But Jerry Lawler, better than Coach, better than Byron Saxton, not better than Corey Graves, I'll admit that. But to say that Jim Ross is better than Jerry Lawler ever was, and between 95 and 2002, Jerry Lawler was really good, that says how good Jim Ross is. Because you're right, he is. But if you remember how good Jerry Lawler once was, that only speaks to how good Jim Ross is now, even though Jim Ross now isn't as good as he was then. That just speaks to the greatness of Jim Ross.
And that does give Jerry credit. You're right.
I haven't been able to tolerate Jerry Lawler for 10 years, but if Jim Ross is better than him 10 years ago, that means Jim Ross is just that good.
All right, and that trip down memory lane brings us to the last little bit before we say goodnight. This week in wrestling history, and I'm gonna hand this one over to Lloyd because he is the absolute wrestling historian. However, he has nothing to say that I wouldn't say. This specific week in history, I think we can all agree on.
So this week in history, as many of you know, just yesterday was the anniversary of Owen Hart's passing. And ironically, one of the reasons by design that I kind of spoke to Jerry Lawler's professionalism as a commentator to further establish how good Jim Ross is now in that last part is because Jerry Lawler on that night played a very significant role in exactly when we as viewers kind of knew that something was really wrong. Like I'll be honest with everybody, I haven't watched yet the Dark Side of the Ring documentary only because I needed yesterday to pass before I went and saw that. But in past years, in that documentary, like if you watch the pay-per-view live, if you've even heard about it, you remember when Jerry Lawler he was in the ring after Owen fell, and he went back to the commentator's table, and before the announcement was officially made, Jerry Lawler just said, no, it doesn't look good at all. And I'll never forget that, because what me and some other people I was watching it with thought was hopefully just a wacky wrestling stunt, he bounced off maybe, but when that happened that we were kind of like, holy shit. And Owen Hart, I mean, what can I say about Owen Hart that any wrestling fan old enough, if you're not old enough to remember Jake the Snake and Arn Anderson, Owen Hart might be someone new to you as well. But Owen Hart, obviously, the brother of Bret Hart, and just one of the greatest wrestlers to never be the world champion. Although, here's a funny story as a New Englander, he actually did win the WWF Championship up in Maine in a kind of a dusty finish that later saw the belt go back to Bret. And as a New Englander, we have Owen Hart winning the championship in 5 seconds. We have Mick Foley winning his first title and Stone Cold winning his first title. So that's a little aside there. But my biggest regret about Owen Hart is the fact that I feel like he was a wrestler that did not need the blue blazer gimmick. He's Owen fucking Hart. He doesn't need to be put up in the rafters and sent down to be funny. King of the Ring, 1996. Owen Hart was on commentary that entire night, and he was one of the funniest pieces of talent on that entire show. And he was just sitting there talking the whole time. Bret Hart in the ring. You couldn't find too many people in the ring that were better than Bret Hart, especially in the Attitude Era, where the focus wasn't as much on wrestling as much as it was on trash TV and spectacle. Owen Hart was one of those guys that could get in the ring and wrestle. And my biggest regret about Owen Hart's death is that, unlike Eddie Guerrero, where his body was just giving up on him and it was only a matter of time, unlike people like Roddy Piper, Dusty Rhodes, where they were just older and time is undefeated. Owen Hart's death was completely preventable, and it didn't have to happen. And the fact that it happened because people thought it would be funny, to me, is what makes that the most, if not the second most tragic incident in wrestling history. And it took place in 1999, yesterday.
And not to take away from Owen Hart, but just also in the respect of the other families this week, Shad Gaspard especially, he died a hero. And then Hannah Kamara, who has similar issues to you and me.
Bullying's not okay.
Yeah,
put that out there.
I hate to start off our first episode of this and end our week in, this week in history of wrestling is just a tragic week. But I think we should all keep that in mind and, remember that we have to cherish each other, and you just never know when you're going to lose something or someone you love. I didn't realize that I enjoyed baseball as much as I did until I didn't have it, and I'm trying to make that light.
Mm-hmm.
But
remember outside.
I do. I took a walk. I took a walk today, which was very nice. Just to actually have air. However, me being from the South, apparently, New England pollen is very different from Southern pollen, even though we have more of it. And now I've developed new allergies I've never known about.
Progress.
That's what we'll call that. You got anything you want to say before we sign this off?
Thanks for letting me come aboard.
We're doing this together.
I know, but it was your decision, so I'm giving you proper due and letting me do this project with you.
Well, I'll say this in the same regard. Thanks for finally agreeing to do a podcast with me. I've been trying to bait you into this for a year.
Fair.
All right, and with that, I'll say Trash Panda out, and I'll send it to Legacy.
Don't die!
See you next week, guys.